It is already the first weekend of Summerfest. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, the Stones visit the Brew City and Summerfest kicks off its run. The Supreme Court upholds Obamacare subsidies and rules on gay marriage. The county board overwhelmingly overrides County Executive Chris Abeley's veto of a move to hire 30 new sheriff's deputies. And the Bucks pass on drafting Sam Decker and pick Rashad Vaughn at number 17 in the NBA draft. But first, it was a huge week for the U.S. Supreme Court. On Thursday, Obamacare survived when the court upheld subsidies. On Friday, on a 5-4 vote, the court legalized gay marriage in all 50 states. The dissents in both cases were withering, with conservatives accusing the majorities of ignoring the plain language of the health care law and finding a right in the Constitution where none existed. But although the cases settled the legal fight, they did not end the political battles over either issue. Now, joining me on our panel this morning, defense attorney Dan Adams, the managing editor of RightWisconsin.com, Colin Roth, political strategist Linda Bruin, and media trackers Brian Sickman. Brian, we'll start with you. What happens now? Where do we go on the gay marriage issue? Because this is not a surprise that the court ruled the way it will do. But is this going to be a live issue, or does it take it off the political table?
Well, Charlie, I think it's going to be a live issue for a long time to come because the Supreme Court can't make law. And what they did was basically undo law. And the majority in this decision wrote that they were going to try to protect religious liberty. Yeah. But a Supreme Court decision can't protect religious liberty. So that's where the debate's going to move right now. Right. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that he was very concerned about the future of people of faith in this country. Regardless of that faith practice, the court said, look, you can continue to believe that, teach that, but it didn't protect what the First Amendment protects, which is the free exercise of religion. So that's going to be the new political battleground and certainly the new legal battleground as this issue moves forward.
More specifically, what are you concerned about? What do you think is going to happen next?
Well, as Chief Justice John Roberts pointed out, that even the Solicitor General who's arguing the case in front of the Supreme Court said that houses of worship and faith charities may have to change their approach to how they treat same-sex couples. If they don't, they may have to face IRS tax sanctions for that. That's a big issue. That's what we saw with Obamacare. People saying, the Catholic Church coming out and saying, our conscience says we have to do this, the law says we have to do this, and there's no exception for our faith practice to actually be lived out here.
Dan Adams, this is a legitimate concern. I mean, I think that the issue is settled to the extent that you're going to have gay marriage in this country for the rest of, our lifetime. There's going to be no constitutional amendment. That's not going to happen. But there is this concern. So what happens next? What will happen to the religious organizations, nonprofit organizations, individuals who do not embrace this? Is there going to be, a push to conform, to embrace? Make it mandatory.
There will be. There's going to be some legal back and forth for the next generation, I'm sure. I'm glad that this happened right now for my gay and lesbian brothers and sisters in Milwaukee and all over. But I think legislation is going to be the ultimate goal of both sides.
For what?
To somehow meter out some type of workable, livable solution for everyone so that people can have their religious beliefs, not have those trampled by people who want to engage in the joy and freedom of marriage.
Yeah, but the issue, as we saw in Indiana, is that that is a highly toxic issue when we do try to enumerate religious freedoms and such. And I think I'm not as concerned necessarily about houses of worship necessarily, but I think we are going to see battlegrounds in private schools, and even with the voucher program you could see things like that, and different nonprofits and such. But I think what we're also going to see is an increased cultural pressure when you see CEOs and Apple and try to exert their pressure as they did in the Indiana religious freedom issue. They're going to do that more.
Linda Brown.
I agree with Colin. I think that there will be certain subsets of this issue that will actually be not only fought out in the legislature, which I think they should go to first, but also in the court system. Because when a private school or a private company has to deal or takes an action that a gay couple is viewed as discriminating against them, the bottom line is that's what will put more concrete verbs to this decision. The Supreme Court made the overall overriding decision about the issue and settled it permanently, you said. But the bottom line is there's fallout for that's going to have to be weeded through.
I mean, I think that we were nearing a consensus. We got more than 60% of Americans that were ready to accept gay marriage, but you still have a substantial number of Americans who won't, including the Catholic Church, including many other religious faiths, including the Islamic faith, and those people are not going to change their faith. So the question is, does diversity mean diversity of reaction to this? Is there going to be the push for conformity? And I'm concerned about it. You know, Colin and I were looking at a newspaper editorial from a newspaper in Pennsylvania that announced on Friday morning that this was settled law, and therefore they would no longer be accepting letters to the editor and op-ed pieces criticizing gay marriage. Really? So we are not allowed to debate that kind of a question. And I think that's what's concerning. And also, I think part of it's going to be, is this going to be equated to racial bigotry and expression? I mean, are we going to see a time, let's be honest about it, when people who believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, that will be considered hate speech? Is that going to, are we going to be going in that direction?
And that's the debate, and that's really where I think the Supreme Court erred. Even if you support same-sex marriage, how the court went about it was the wrong way to do it, because this is an issue that should have been settled through the legislative process, as states have already done. There's the freedom to debate it, to hash it out. When the Supreme Court looks into the Constitution, finds something that doesn't really exist there and imposes it, then it becomes a cultural flashpoint. We saw that with Roe v. Wade decades ago. I think there's still going to be some repercussions, political repercussions, judicial repercussions for what we've seen today.
So what has your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, as usual, you're first.
Charlie, my glass is half full because next week commemorates the 152nd anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, the turning point of the Civil War, where the Union, including Wisconsin's legendary Iron Brigade, defeated the Confederacy's attempt to invade the North. My glass is half empty because our governor insulted more than 90,000 of our Wisconsin forebears who fought against the terrible racist Confederacy when he flaked out on whether their battle flag should still be raised, showing he cares more about South Carolina primary voters than his own state's heritage.
Colin Roth.
My glass is half full because the people of Charleston have shown unimaginable and inspiring grace in the face of evil, but it's half empty because some, like David Bowen, want to link the Charleston murders to conservative policy and media. That's just ugly.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because technology has made the 48-hour waiting period to buy a gun no longer necessary, and ending it will be convenient for many responsible owners. But my glass is half empty because losing the waiting period may have tragic consequences for a small but hugely important subset of domestic violence victims, whose killers often buy their guns legally. Waiting periods have helped prevent some of those crimes.
Brian Sikma.
Well, my glass is half full because U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin is supporting a resolution drawing attention to post-traumatic stress disorder, a condition that affects many veterans. But my glass is half empty because Senator Baldwin created a culture of incompetence and irresponsibility in her office by refusing to look into real allegations of misconduct in veteran care at the Toma VA clinic.
Well, my glass is half full because Colin Roth here had a birthday this week. Happy birthday, Colin. My glass is half empty because I still have socks older than him. Next on Sunday Insight, the state budget is due this week. Will lawmakers break the deadlock? It has been weeks now since the legislature's Joint Finance Committee has even met, a sign that Republicans who control state government can't agree among themselves. The budget was supposed to be done by July 1st, and that is not going to happen. The holdups, three issues. One, the massive transportation budget. Legislators have to decide how much they want to borrow and how much spending they want to cut. And the issue is splitting legislators in legislators in southeastern Wisconsin who want to finish work on the massive zoo interchange project, and outstate legislators who say that if spending is cut, everybody should feel the pain, including the zoo project. Second major issue, prevailing wage, the law that artificially inflates the cost of public projects by more than 10% by requiring certain wages to be set by government. Conservatives want to repeal the provision altogether, or at least for local governments, and that is being strongly resisted by the road builder lobby and unions. The third big issue, the Bucks Arena, which increasingly looks like it will be pulled out of the budget altogether. So who's responsible for this? What's going on?
Well, a few things are going on, and I think that if we'll go to the transportation budget first, because I think that zoo interchange moment this last week was very interesting in that the legislature, particularly the assembly, they want to decrease that bonding in the governor's budget, but they want revenue. Right. And so we all know the governor's not going to veto any revenue. And so what they attempted to do was use the zoo interchange as leverage. They said, let's delay this, and that may build pressure for revenues.
And apparently some of the assembly leadership, including Robin Voss, is behind that particular strategy.
That's right, and that came in that flashpoint.
So what should they do? I mean, there's a legitimate argument to make that if you're going to cut that kind of spending, why should the zoo interchange be exempt?
Well, the zoo interchange is just profoundly important for the state first. It's a major vital economic corridor, as well as the fact that anyone who's familiar with this area knows that it's very much in progress.
Okay, Linda Bruin.
I think the zoo interchange is a very key thing, and I think they actually did it to get Walkaway Walker to come home and actually strike a deal, because Walker wants the zoo interchange done for all the right reasons. And I think that by threatening to pull that out or to dramatically delay its implementation, that might be the one thing that does get Scott Walker to come and help hammer out a Republican deal. These are not Democrats holding up this budget. This is all internal Republican politics.
Yeah. So did you see that on a bumper sticker? Is that where you got that from? The Walkaway Walker thing?
No. I think it's a good
well,
label
how big a
time.
factor is Scott Walker's absence?
Well, Charlie, the Wisconsin budget debate's now a national debate. The LA Times had a story out on Friday, not an op-ed, looking at Governor Walker, Wisconsin Republicans, what's happening with our state budget. Their analysis and the analysis of some of the people they talked to from here in Wisconsin was that we have a revenue problem, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. Would it be nice to have more revenue? Sure, it'd be nice if politicians have more money to spend. But we have a spending problem, and for decades this has been building, and now we actually need to start trimming back here. I hate to say it, but every year under Governor Scott Walker, Republican control, the budget has grown. This is a year where we need to start reining some of that spending back in. But as Colin pointed out, Lynn as well, there are some areas of the transportation budget where it's a legitimate need. We do need to spend money on it.
Should it be cut? The zoo interchange?
Absolutely not. That's vital to the state. I mean, I know out-of-state lawmakers want it cut, but they shouldn't happen.
I'm just wondering why no one has talked about a toll on the interchange. Let's have the people who are using those roads actually pay for the actual usage. That would probably be the most efficient and fair taxation for that project itself.
That is not a terrible idea, but the problem is they're not going to come up with that in the next several weeks here. And I think long-term toll roads are worth looking at here. I mean, I think a couple of dynamics are taking place here. Number one, I mean, let's be honest about it. The governor's absence means that dad's not home, and that's why you have the Lord of the Flies situation going on here. But also, I think that we're seeing on a number of these issues, we're seeing there's several candidates there. But we're also seeing the dynamic of what happens when you have certain special interest groups who have disproportionate outsized influence. And I'm talking about some of the road builders lobbies and the contractors who apparently have tremendous influence, particularly in the Assembly caucus. And as a result of that, you're not getting movement on prevailing wage, and you are having these games that are being played right now on the transportation budget. So any sense, you want to give an over-under when this is going to get done?
I have no idea when it's going to get done, but I can certainly say the way it's being done right now does not bode well for Republican majorities in the future. We're now learning what agencies and which lobbyists Republican leadership won't say no to, and if Republican leaders want to hold on to that majority, they need to stop the way they're doing business right now.
I think the dynamic that's going to play out here, and this is kind of a surprise for some folks, is that I think that you're going to have to see the state Senate, particularly under the leadership of Scott Fitzgerald, they're going to have to resolve some of those issues. They're going to have to go first, and then once they've gone first, then the pressure is on the Assembly, because I know some of the Assembly leadership are saying, well, there's no way we can get any prevailing wage reform, or there's no way we can get the transportation budget. If in fact the Senate gets their act together with a little bit of push from Scott Walker, they might get this done maybe by the middle of the month. You may not want to hear it, but we will tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Dan Adams, you're first.
My advice to Democrats: study Rand Paul's plan to simplify federal income taxes. Simplifying the tax code helps the little guy who can't hire tax lawyers, accountants, and lobbyists. Simplifying the code is an issue Democrats should steal.
Yeah, that won't happen. Colin Roth.
My advice is for Republican members in the Assembly playing games with the zoo interchange in hopes of getting more transportation revenue. Drop it. It's too important for the region and this state.
Linda Bruin.
A recent poll shows New Hampshire Republicans favoring Donald Trump over 15 other more legitimate presidential hopefuls like Rubio, Walker, and Christie. My advice to New Hampshire Republicans is to stop embarrassing yourselves, come to your senses, and dump Mr. Trump.
Brian Sikma.
Well, the Obama White House this week announced that the U.S. now communicates and negotiates with those who hold Americans hostage. Well, my advice is that we return to the policy established by President Thomas Jefferson during the Barbary Wars. We don't negotiate with hostage takers. We go after them and kill them.
Well, my unsolicited advice is to gay rights activists. Celebrate your victory on gay marriage. It is truly historic, but do not make it an excuse to demonize, marginalize, or silence those who don't agree with you. Next on Sunday Insight, heritage or hate, the continuing issue over the Confederate flag. The flag is coming down in South Carolina and other southern states. Leaders call for the removal of the Confederate flag from state capitals, but it hasn't stopped there. Amazon, eBay, Walmart, and other retailers said they would stop selling merchandise with the flag, and Oak Creek-based Eater Manufacturing said it would stop making the flag. Then this. Apple yanked all of the apps for Civil War games that included images of the flag. They backed off from that. And the National Park Service says it won't sell Confederate flags even at Civil War battlefields. Right moves, Dan Adams?
Well, there's
the evil, nasty, terrible Confederates.
There are a lot of moves there. And here's the thing about the Confederate flag. I treat people who fly the Confederate flag like I do people who get unfortunate neck and face tattoos. They can do that. That's fine. But I think you're an idiot. Because you don't understand the incredible hurt that it causes a lot of people in this society. So if you're an individual and you want to fly that, you want to put it on the bumper sticker of your car, fine. But if a government entity is embracing that, that's not okay.
Okay, I agree with you up to a point. It's just we've gotten to this hysteria where it is not enough to simply take it down from government buildings. When you have Apple actually saying we're not going to have apps for games that show the Union and the Confederate Army, there's kind of a, the velocity of this hysteria gets to the point, are we able to do anything halfway in our culture anymore, Colin?
No, it's unfortunate because I think we lose the distinction between public and private expression. And I'm not one who's ever going to defend the Confederate flag, and I'm not going to defend it in a public space. I think that Nikki Haley made the right move. But there's this sense that we have to ban everything. And symbols like the Confederate flag, we have to admit that they're part of history, and history is complex and requires context, and it's much easier to just whitewash and ban and cleanse rather than to understand that.
I also thought it was extraordinary that if you go on Amazon and eBay, at least on Friday, you can get all kinds of Nazi memorabilia, you can get Soviet Union memorabilia, and that they're patting themselves on the back by saying, well, we're not going to have that Confederate flag, okay, bad, racist, whatever, but they're not alone here. So how do you justify selling, swastikas, but not the Confederate flag?
Well, I think that's a great point, Charlie, because, after World War II, it was illegal to own or distribute the swastika, and that changed over time, and now it's accepted as a symbol that's sold for memorabilia worth, that type of thing. Frankly, I think this is just as bad as a Nazi swastika. I don't want either of these sold. On the other hand, I agree with the approach Dan's taking, that it's individual right.
I understand it's become fashionable, but the reality is that whatever you think about the Confederacy, it trivializes what Nazi Germany did during the Holocaust to say that the Civil War was the same thing, because it is not the same thing.
12 million Africans were brought here in slavery. It's not trivializing the Holocaust. It's not, because I'm as appalled by that as anything.
Right,
I'm just saying that there are levels of outrage, and both of those deserve our outrage, not one or the other.
Okay, what is it you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
I don't get why anyone would stand by the existing state economic development agency, the WEDC. Shouldn't incentives for businesses be based on objective, across-the-board rationales, not the government picking winners and losers?
Colin Roth.
What I don't get is why it took Justice Roberts 21 pages to twist, contort, and invent the meaning for 4 plain English words in the Affordable Care Act.
Linda Bruin.
Well, until Governor Nikki Haley called for removing the Confederate flag from South Carolina's State House, most Republican presidential hopefuls refused to call for removal, saying they didn't want to interfere in a state issue. But why then did these same candidates enthusiastically comment on whether Governor Pence should sign Indiana's Religious Liberty Act? Why was it okay to interfere in one state issue but not the other?
Brian Sikma.
Well, what I don't get is why, facing a spending problem, Republicans in Madison crafting the state budget don't want to save taxpayers and thus state and local government hundreds of millions of dollars with a full repeal of the state's outdated prevailing wage law.
You ought to ask Robin Voss that. But what I don't understand is, if words don't mean anything, if the law doesn't mean what it says, and the Constitution can be ignored or reinterpreted at the whim of judges, what's really left of the framework of our constitutional republic? Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It is time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first.
My loser this week is conservative author Ann Coulter, who called South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley an immigrant who does not understand America's history, because Haley is calling for the Confederate flag to be taken down in her state. Ann Haley was born in South Carolina. My winner, and this is an easy one, the thousands of couples who are now free to exercise the personal liberty, equality, and joy of marriage after the Supreme Court's decision to stop government-sponsored discrimination and legalize gay marriage nationwide.
Colin Roth.
My winner this week is South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley for leading the effort to remove the Confederate battle flag from state grounds. She did so with conviction, leadership, grace, and confidence. My loser is George Orwell. He spent a great deal of his life warning of the implications when words lose meaning. And on his birthday last week, the Supreme Court issued a decision that more or less said that words used to craft laws are irrelevant and are, well, meaningless.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my winners are the millions of Americans who will be able to keep their health insurance after the Supreme Court upheld a key part of the Affordable Care Act. Hospital systems whose bad debt will continue to fall, and insurance systems who have more certainty regarding coverage. My losers are congressional Republicans and presidential candidates who waste time trying to end Obamacare instead of making needed changes. The Affordable Care Act has insured over 15 million previously uninsured Americans and requires pre-existing condition coverage for everyone. But it has serious flaws, and we'd all benefit if Congress would work together to improve it.
Rah, rah, rah. Brian Sickman.
Well, it seems cheap saying winner, but I want to say thank you to God for giving me the strength to complete a challenging but enjoyable phase of training with the Wisconsin Army National Guard earlier this month. It's truly a privilege to serve.
Well, my winner is South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who, as Colin said, handled the removal of the Confederate flag from the state capitol with dignity, compassion, and class. My loser, Apple, which at least for a while was going to pull down the apps for all of the games featuring the Civil War because they had images of the Confederate flag. That was just nuts. Thanks for joining us. Join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.